Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, AdTech, What Comes Next? We'll begin our webinar in just a few moments, but first I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping. You can use the question section on the right-hand side to ask questions throughout the presentation. Additionally, we will be sharing the presentation video recording link following the live presentation, which will be emailed to all registrants. If you are interested in having anyone from the panel follow up with you afterwards, we'll be holding a poll at the end of the webinar where you can request that someone touch base with you later. And with those quick notes, I'm going to turn it over and we will begin.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our State of AdTech panel. During our last panel in Q4, we touched on how the world's changed and how AdTech and digital media is adopting to this new normal. And for our panel today, we want to discuss a little bit about how our Q4 expectations actually met with performance, as well as what we think is going to come going forward with all the changes and the rollout of the vaccine and everything of that nature. So first off, I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce our panelists and thank them for joining us today. Thank them in advance. We're really excited to hear everyone's thoughts on the topics today. As I introduced you, just give us a little background about yourself and your company. We'll start with Zach Dugo, from the CEO and founder of Insticator.
Hi, I'm Zach Dugo, founder and CEO of Insticator. We're the global leader of engagement for publishers through interactive content. We do that through our two core products, our Insticator commenting unit that we embed into media companies where we drive engagement through commenting and we increase time on site and page views per session, as well as monetization through programmatic advertising, and our content engagement units where we have trivia polling, content recirculation, as well as programmatic advertising. We pull in a lot of first-party data and that we use and bucket people into audience segments that we then use for monetization purposes. So we work with over 2,000 media publishers around the globe, primarily focused in North America, with a team of just over 90 people and growing. So that's a bit about us.
Awesome, thank you. Next over to Alon Leibovich, the CEO and co-founder of Brand Total.
Just unmuted myself. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Brand Total, we're a brand marketing analytics company. So if you think about marketing as a spectrum, right? Performance marketing on one hand and brand marketing on another, there are a lot of companies that are focused on optimizing that bottom piece of the funnel. Not a lot focused on optimizing that brand awareness, brand consideration phase of the funnel. We're focused or solely focused on that. So we have basically make ROBI, return on brand investment type of metric. So you can basically now have brand marketing as optimizable, measurable, quantifiable, just as the bottom of the funnel is. We work with a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, names that you all know and love or hate, but you probably do know them. We do that basically using a holistic view of the market. So you get an understanding of what your competitive landscape is doing, and therefore you know how to optimize, as I said, that brand marketing piece of the funnel. We've been around for about 4 years. We've raised $20 million to date from various like VCs, strategics, etc. We operate globally out of Tel Aviv, New York, San Francisco, LA. So very scattered all over the place, and focus on growth in the next coming years.
Right, excellent, thank you. And next, Brian Shimmerlich, the CEO and co-founder of Vengo Labs.
Hi, Vengo is a platform to connect brands and consumers. We do that through our physical plus digital interactive kiosks. We currently have 1,500 of them deployed across the country. You may have seen us in New York, at your gym, at your college. And last year, mid-pandemic, we launched in the New York City subway stations and the commuter train stations going north and east. Co-founded the company in 2013. And it's been quite an interesting year as our gyms and colleges have totally changed, as well as being an at-home media property and sort of seeing some of the changes around ad tech there.
Great. Excellent. Thank you all again for joining us. And just as a reminder to the audience, if you do have questions, please drop them into our chat box. If they're directly pertinent, we'll definitely jump them in the middle of the panel. If not, we'll address them all at the end before we wrap up. And with that, let's kick off with our first question. In our discussions at our September panel, we noted that remote work really shifted the way companies have started to sell to their customers. So I'm curious what changes you've had to implement in how you're selling to people or businesses, and how do you expect these changes to continue on or to even change in light of the current situation and the rollout of the vaccine? I guess, Alon, if you want to kick us off, please.
Yeah, sure. We, like any other, I'm guessing, like SaaS analytics company, had made, the adjustments to. It turns out you don't have to actually meet people in order to sign big deals or in order to have like big customers join on board. I think what basically happened is it made the company, or I'm guessing the ecosystem, just much more efficient in the go-to-market strategy, right? So if you believe that you really had to fly out to Raleigh, North Carolina, or Portland, Oregon, like in order to close the deal and like get like the actual handshake, you now understand that Zoom meetings are really enough, and sometimes yes, that meeting could have actually been an email, and it's just much more low touch. It's much more to the point, which I think is less time spent on things that are irrelevant. If a customer is not interested in your product, you get to the best answer after a quick yes, which is a quick no. So I think just generally lower touch, more straight and to the point. The sessions are more interactive. People, people are feeling like awkward if the camera is not on nowadays. Where if you had it before COVID times, then it was kind of okay to be like off camera. So now it's kind of a requirement or an expectation, which is great. Overall, I think it's great for business. Obviously, great for businesses, who are trying to scale globally, because you can have a better reach, better unit economics for your company, better scale. So all in all, I think, definitely, an impediment on kind of, ads and marketing momentarily, or like around kind of the slowness, or kind of the wilderness with advertisers on how do I'm going to spend my money, but overall a positive implication for startups all around.
Excellent. Zach, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think COVID has been really tough on the brick and mortar retailers, but really, really positive on the DTC brands. We've just seen that increase in spend. Everybody's spending so much more time on their different publishing sites and social media. So you've just got a big increase in digital inventory, and with so many, big increase in DTC brand spending across certain verticals, and obviously other verticals tanking like travel. I think there's been a lot of interesting, winners, if you will, to people who've taken advantage of the COVID set of circumstances. I do think personally, at least, that things like what you asked about regarding selling, we would have our sales team go to a lot of conferences and are doing much more of that digitally. I do think that'll take a long time to come back. I do think while people are anxious, it's going to take a while before so many people take care of their kids or their grandparent, before they feel comfortable to really travel and go to these different conferences. And I think we've even found, right, so many companies didn't even think it was possible to do business in this way until they were forced to. And so I think by nature also, the in-person selling is going to, even once things have fully recovered, hopefully sooner than later, there will be much more that happens digitally. It'll definitely come back because you need some of that in-person touch point, but not nearly to what it was. That's my own opinion.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, to Zach's point, I think this has greatly accelerated the trends that already existed, right? We were already doing as many meetings as possible via Zoom, and that kind of older laggard crowd to that adoption is now forced, and it's really accelerating things. For us with a physical product, how do we sell to businesses in this environment? It's completely changed. we can't have a conversation with a location about hosting a Vengo without starting with COVID and the impact and what that looks like today, next month, next quarter, next year. We've always said, there are brick and mortar retailers, there's e-commerce, and for all the locations in between, we can really come in and be a turnkey retail partner. And we can provide your guests with whatever things they need in that moment. And so for us, we've now really been able to demonstrate that with PPE, right? So it's been a catalyst for us to open up locations that we, maybe weren't able to access pre-COVID, as we're really kind of living that. And locations need to think about over these different mid-COVID, post-COVID periods, how are they thinking about, sanitization? How are they thinking about communicating that with their guests? So for us, it's changed everything, but it's also really kind of just accelerated what was already there.
Right, excellent. So I think it kind of lends nicely to, we were all concerned and we were bracing ourselves for what would come through during Q4, which is typically the biggest quarter in the advertising industry. And a lot of concerns range from underperformance to keeping up with increased demand because of this transition to everyone being online and online content. So I guess your thoughts, and some of you kind of lent your thoughts just a little bit, but what were your thoughts on how Q4 went, and did it live up to your expectations, and what you were thinking was coming for you? And I guess, Zach, if you want to kind of kick off that conversation.
Yeah, sure, happy to. If you'd asked me about Q2, I'd be like, Q2 met none of our expectations. But Q4, we exceeded our targets by over 25%. We were really pleasantly surprised with how Q4 turned out, and in such a year with such dramatic swings, it was such a pleasant surprise. That's what I've consistently seemed to be hearing, across the industry, and certainly as we speak to our customers and the publishers we work with, there seems to be just most people have performed very well for Q4. We were really happy across the board on that front.
Excellent. And Alon?
Yeah, I would say that, after kind of the initial shock, that the industry had gotten into, kind of advertisers started to understand that, I really do need to advertise in order to, get my business back going. So we kind of felt the same. As we said, kind of the initial reaction of like, okay, what is going on and how is the world going to continue, kind of were replaced by, okay, how do we actually advertise in this era, right? And you mentioned the vaccines and kind of in the last question, but I think it's also appropriate to talk about them now, because I think that what actually happened is we saw a lot of advertisers not. Some of them definitely jumped on the bandwagon of like, let's cut budgets, but others have tried to actually, find the right opportunities, increase their budget, but just align their messaging to the right kind of timing. So if a part of our proposition is like messaging analytics, so we have like really nice segmentation of like the way messages has been changing over the kind of from Q2, Q3, Q4. You can see kind of the different focuses that advertisers had in these different quarters. Q4 was more about hope, and like looking towards the future with kind of the initial rollout of the vaccines. We're seeing some of that the same again in Q1. Like speaking specifically for myself, I spent some of that time in Israel, so we can actually feel like we got a bunch of vaccines, so we can actually feel kind of that new motion happening. And it also, advertising is a reflection of culture, right, and what's going on in the world. So you can literally see that mirror image in the messages that advertisers were putting out there.
Right, excellent. And Brian?
So Vengo is, a very specific piece of the media world, out of home. And so for us, it met expectations. It was certainly not up to pre-COVID performance, But I think as kind of that optimism pre-holiday with good numbers kind of rolled in, it was definitely one of our stronger quarters, trending the right way, but not quite back where we want to be.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think for a question for you, Brian, specifically, because you mentioned you have the brick and mortar and you have the digital. For digital out of home, then the challenge of remote work, people barring their windows and locking their doors. I'm just curious, the specifics on what you had to alter in order to start reaching people. You kind of touched on it before, but if you could dive a little deeper on what specifically you had to do to make sure you met at least your expectations for the quarters coming up.
Yeah, we had to change everything. So we just let go of the past and, not complain, but just adapt. We did so in many ways. One is, previous to COVID, our primary interaction was through a touch screen. Certainly it was not clear if touchscreens were contributing to the problem, and I think it sort of ended up that they are not, and we're actually continuing to see an incredible amount of touches of the screen today, but we didn't want to bet on that, right? And I personally don't want to touch anything, right? I felt that way pre-COVID, which is my own problem. So we launched a mobile web product, and we dreamed it up, designed it, prototyped it, tested it, rolled it out in about 90 days. And the mobile web products basically enabled us to turn the entire network touchless, where someone can use their mobile phone to essentially pair with the kiosk and serve as a remote control. So the phone takes over all the products that you could buy, all the samples that you can earn, and kind of supersedes the touchscreen capacity. And so that's been really fun and interesting, great marketing for us, great adoption. We're seeing like 75% conversion from people opening it to buying or sampling something. And then, so that's on the tech side. On the strategy side, we just got to go to where the consumers are, right? So as college and gym traffic, declined, likely temporarily, we went to grocery and we launched a new product where we launched giant screens without our kind of typical product dispensing capability, but running our same software. So giant screens in grocery at a time when grocery traffic was up and playing like this really important role in people's lives. So overall, really just try to adapt and really listen to the consumer and move forward.
And do you think those changes that have implemented are something that you're going to continue using going forward, putting aside like the role of the vaccine and the slow, but as things really do normalize, do you think it's something that is going to be for the benefit, or are you going to kind of roll back to what you were doing before? What's the current plan?
No, I think the path is gone. I mean, how do people generally, move forward from this? I think it's going to be all over the map, but I don't think that the consciousness of the things from our life that have been taken away over the last year, that consciousness is not going to be gone. So I think, sanitization, thinking about where you go and who you interact with, it's here to stay. And so I think there is no going back. It's really only going forward.
Excellent, thank you. Zach, this question's for you. Instigator's platform encourages additional engagement for publisher content. So kind of with the sudden drastic shift to online content that I mentioned before, did you find that those publishers that were almost more hesitant to try these creative solutions on the pre-COVID times were more eager now that the online content was heating up, or were they even more hesitant because they weren't sure what the outcome was going to be? But were they ready to dive in?
Yeah, I don't think we didn't see, I think in the beginning of COVID, we saw a little bit of a paralysis of people trying to like, well, let me just freeze and reassess and understand what's happening in my business before I make any changes. But since then, we haven't seen any like slowdown in terms of like integrations. In fact, we've seen so much engagement. I think a lot of that, especially with our products, which provide conversations for end users, there's so many dynamic things happening around the globe. So, we work with like political sites and sports sites. And so we've even seen sites, be more focused on driving end user engagement, because the actual engagement patterns we've seen have changed so much. You would have people that maybe when people are all going into an office, they would be less likely to go and read some article on Sports Illustrated or on WebMD, who's we work with, or on Fox Sports or whichever type of site. But now everybody working from home in between calls, I think there's a lot of unique types of engagements that are happening in different spikes because our own like life patterns have changed so much, and now that's just reflected digitally. That's what we're seeing in a lot of the end user data.
Awesome, thank you. Lana, question for you. So Brand Total provides solutions that allow for insight in your competitor strategy. So did you find that demand for these quote unquote insider information fluctuated dramatically as online content and competition increased?
Yeah, so I would say that to an earlier point here, I think that what happened is that kind of some kind of portion of the market like really leaned into that, because e-commerce or DTC brands like became increasingly competitive. They were already competitive, and kind of COVID, as we talked about, like accelerated a lot of the trends, accelerated a lot of things that were already in motion. So we definitely saw kind of a shift in where it's happening, where the competitive activity happened. The other thing that kind of is worth noting, like much of our focus is kind of around social and digital as a channel. And if you think about it, like there wasn't any like lots of alternatives for advertisers to put their budget to work. I mean, you have to advertise, you still have to get your, like the word out there. You still have to drive traffic to your website. You still have to raise awareness. You still have to engage with consumers. All of that now kind of only narrowed down to you can't do it in like most places that you did, aside from social. And like people were at home and most of the time, etc. So if anything, like competitive intensity increased, in light of these events. Obviously, like some industries, fell completely flat and, are still trying to recover. Movie theater, like theatrical marketing, right, for movies. Auto took a hit, travel took a hit. But the brands or kind of the advertisers that wanted to get their word out there, that had benefited or were on the right side of this, or not even on the right side of this, but took a pause at start and then kind of moved on, went back to the same platforms to find an increasingly harder environment to be apparent and to make noise in. So if anything, I would say that basically competitive intensity and just kind of the battle for attention, share of voice, for consumer engagement, for the positive sentiment of the consumers, that's only intensified.
All right, excellent, thank you. I guess before we kind of start talking about a little predictions that we think for the future, if you could pick one key takeaway from, what you've changed or how performance went during the last quarter, what would you be and what would it be, whether good or bad? And if it needs to be changed, how do you think you would change it in the future? Obviously, you don't need anything super specific, but like, how could you consider changing it? And it could be a broadband item. I guess this time, Brian, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the most interesting thing to me was that as traffic to our locations declined in COVID, the kind of initial medium-term reaction from media buyers was that it didn't go down the same amount, right? It went down more. And so it was interesting to see the gap between like the actual traffic is here, but the buying went down to here. And thinking about the human decision making that drove that, and then how we can use data and technology to combat that and give people comfort and say, no, like our data is coming through on a 12-hour lag, and whatever you're reading on the news is unrelated to the fact that our traffic is precisely at 89% of pre-COVID levels. So it's just interesting to see how the data, the technology, and the human decision making kind of interact.
Zach?
What would I change?
What could you change, or what was one key takeaway that you think went a lot better than you thought it would?
Yeah. I would say, I think there's really twofold. I thought, just in terms of like culturally, I thought it'd be really challenging for people to, I thought it was going to be much worse in terms of people all working from home and not being able to like see and have human connection. And I feel like that actually has, worked out much better for us as an organization. And some people really love the work from home environment and has played out very well for us. In terms of on the business side, I think one key takeaway we saw was just similar to what Brian was saying. There's an overcorrection, and then we kind of actually consistently see that in both directions. So there was an overcorrection down. We saw a massive overcorrection down in April, which did not reflect the traffic to all of the different publishers we work with, right? The traffic on those sites remained consistent. Those user bases remained, or lots of that traffic increased even, but the demand on the advertising side dropped significantly. And then even in Q4, we saw it better than it's ever been before. I wonder if, it also maybe overcorrected in the other direction. So I think we're kind of still a little bit pendulum swinging, if you will. And so I think if there was something I would change to that is, normally we make a lot of decisions and reforecasting daily and adjusting our business processes and weighted pipelines. You kind of almost, when you have a black swan event like this, have to like adjust how you model things and understand there's no context, there's very little context for it. And so you need to put a big buffer in and be like, all right, we need to reassess how we've been processing things beforehand in terms of how we're planning or financial planning or sales modeling or otherwise.
To be ready for the pivot is what it comes down to, whatever it be, maybe.
Yeah.
Alana, your thoughts?
Yeah, my main takeaway from that, from this kind of time and moving forward, I think is focus. I mean, what happened during this time is people became like much more. You sit on Zoom all day long, and people are kind of they don't want to drag this out. I mean, you get an hour and you can finish the call, I mean, like 40, 45 minutes in, or even 30 something minutes in, if you've gotten the point across. I don't remember any of the meetings, that I attended face to face, like they happen, that's kind of phenomenon that, happened pre-COVID time. So as I said, kind of going back to kind of some of my earlier points about, it's much more kind of honed now, speaking to like the actual end goal versus, like spending time, talking about, I don't know, shooting breeze. And the same point goes across for the business. I think that what COVID did is it made, it forced us to put a very straightforward, simple value proposition in front of customers, instead of kind of the ability to just sell something very broad and something that could be used or interpreted in many different directions. But now, in light of kind of everything is much more kind of measured, bite-sized, in the right amount, it also, like, the business needs to perform the same. So you should be selling one thing to one person that has a single pain point, and that's it. And once you're done with it, get off the call, move on to the next one. And I think that that's kind of an exercise that's great to have, because it forces you to really distill what you're going to be doing and what you're doing right now.
And with that, what do you think is coming in the new year when it comes to advertising or further changes? Are we still kind of in? I know Zach kind of alluded to this pendulum swing that may still be happening. Do you think we still have this roller coaster ride, or people have kind of adapted and now it's just rolling forward and continuing to adapt as we move forward? Any trends maybe that you've seen that we should be paying attention to? Kind of open question, whatever you think is important for people to know in the time to come. And I guess, Zach, I'll put you on the spot for that one.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of an interesting long answer, but I think what we've seen actually in the recent months is that ad tech companies are now trading at much higher revenue multiples when you look at public company comps from Magnite to PubMatic and otherwise. And why that's important is because they're now also able to have more resources. These companies are raising more money again. They went from being like a pariah in the investment community to like not being a pariah. And like there's a lot of money flowing in CTV and direct in the publisher space. And so that investment capital is going to allow for an even more accelerated innovation cycle. So I think you're going to see big leaps and bounds of growth as it relates to 5G and speeds for advertising and technology improvements mixed with a lot more investment coming in, not just into the walled gardens of Google, Facebook, and Amazon. So I think there's going to be a whole host of growth on that front. Unfortunately, I also think there's probably going to be more regulation that we're going to need to deal with because that just seems to be the way the regulatory world is moving. So I think ad spend is going to increase. There'll be a lot of continued innovation. I think we're seeing a lot of it already on the publisher side and the way that we monetize and grow audiences. So I think that the pace at which the industry was moving and say like the last 4 years, I think is going to have bigger jumps even over these next 12 to 24 months. That along with that and healthy things like how the marketplace is adjusting to cookies and privacy and cookies going away and things of that nature. So I guess I would say if the beta was like this before in the industry, I think it's even bigger swings that are going to be happening and bigger changes over the next 24 months.
All right, excellent. Brian.
Or out of home or digital out of home, so digital screens, digital billboards, inside locations, on the street, on the highway. We're kind of like 15 years behind Zach and Alon. So for us, programmatic, the automation of buying and selling is still kind of a new thing. And so, 2 years ago, it was like 98% sold human to human. And so we've kind of been riding this wave, seeing programmatic launch, maybe 5 years ago for our space, our technology being quite well positioned to leverage that. And now we're kind of seeing the big players pile in. And I think that this period of time, trailing 12 months, I think has really been useful for people to kind of put their heads down and start connecting those pipes. And the magic for our industry is going to happen when digital out of home and online ad tech merge, right? So we're now starting to be positioned to not only attract out of home media budgets, which have always been large but kind of segmented, but now we can run video as if we're a website, but doing it in real life. And people are seeing this crazy increase in efficacy when digital marketing and kind of in real life and a home marketing are coupled together. So it's all about programmatic going from like 5% of spend to 25% of spend and connecting into those digital dollars.
Big shift. And Alon, your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, to agree with both Zach and Brian, I think both predictions like I share and I feel kind of the same trends kind of basically happening. The other big push that obviously like we're a measurement company, right? So that we feel is the need to quantify like everything. I mean, think about the fact that aside from the fact that like we still use a term like walled gardens, which is insane in my mind, where in 2021 and advertisers don't have an actual kind of ability to lean into like how is my money doing, because there is a platform in the world that doesn't want to share that. I mean, can you imagine, like if we were back like 20 years ago and like CBS would tell you, I'm not going to tell you anything about the money that you spend with me. Okay, so I won't fail you. I mean, so I think measurement and attribution are going to be key in the years to come. The kind of the dovetail, like this dovetails into what we feel that is going to be kind of, to Zach's point, like regulator knocking at the doors of the walled gardens and saying, "Hey, you guys you've been messing around with your own private little like gardens for a good portion of time," and I don't think that the regulators are going to allow that to continue. I.e., the FTC has launched, like multiple FTC, DOJ, multiple prongs, into Google and Facebook, kind of, the activities. So I think we're going to see more pressure from regulators to understand, like exactly, there was just an article this morning on TechCrunch that referenced the fact that Facebook had known about the fact that it's misleading advertisers for a while, and the fact that there's no third-party measurement to Facebook, for instance. I don't think that situation is going to last like much longer. I don't know how long, but I think we're going to a world where there will be oversight and measurement to these companies, to Facebook, and kind of along the same lines of the fact the data. Consumers are starting to understand that like if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So it means that if you are and you're going to start seeing alternate business models for companies to interact with consumers, namely like start paying consumers for their data, something that we do as a company. So we believe that if you want to get like access to what the consumer is doing, then you can just ask them and like give them something in exchange. So I think that that's like kind of the entire world of data privacy. Obviously, like is gonna keep charging forward, and we're going to see evolutions there. Yeah, and this is like this dovetails into a bunch of what Zach and Brian just like said about every like I think our world is literally going to kind of I don't know if the second wave but like 15 years ago, like like advertising, marketing, media was hot. I do think that we're going to start seeing a shift of the pendulum towards the rise of this of the domain again. Again, like goes hand in hand with the fact that the regulators have identified that a lot of the digital dollars is only going to very few players, and that it's a monopolistic market and needs to be broken up. And I think that that's going to allow for some air in our space for young companies such as ourselves to grow.
Awesome. Some positive outlook there, some concern there for regulations. I think you all kind of touched on some of my last two questions. One is specifically for Alon, but in September you did raise a Series B, Alon. Congratulations, very exciting. How was this process different in this market? And was it easier or more challenging to demonstrate value add? Was it less forthcoming? Investors trying to send money your way? Let's hear your thoughts on that.
That was a tough one. It was a tough one because not in comparison. Like I compared, we've got amazing backers as VCs, and I occasionally talk to them about how does other portfolio companies experience like fundraising and stuff like that. So there are spaces who are very apparent that there's like growth opportunities, and know these monopolistic giants that are even in the vicinity of what's going on, and the space is just emerging and shaping itself. So yeah, it's definitely much easier to get higher, higher multiples, better valuations, all of that stuff. No, we've had it was definitely like not an easy experience. I'm happy that at the end of the day we landed on the and exactly who we wanted to get money from. It's and you're like everybody knows that it's not only about there's like multiple options and it's not only about money. We had a choice of who we wanted to kind of to partner with. So definitely was talking to kind of CEO friends from the cybersecurity space, from health, digital health space. They've had it easier. Just objectively, they've had to talk to fewer investors. They've had to undergo fewer kind of due diligence processes, and we've had to kind of to go through the weeds and to really kind of pinpoint people who still like in this time believe in our space and the growth opportunities that it has. So it wasn't easy, but I'm happy to say that like we ended up, as I said, like with choice, and we selected who we wanted to partner with.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again, and thanks for the insight there. My last question before we kind of open it up to any audience questions we have. So data privacy. We touched on this in the last panel as well, but it's kind of one of those items that could potentially cause a nice upheaval for some companies. After the passing of laws like the GDPR, CCPA, New York Shield, other states are pushing hard for the addition of these privacy laws, but we don't really see much traction on the federal level. With another quarter under our feet, should we be more concerned about new data privacy laws and how they can impact the industry? Do you think it's kind of lessened since then?
I think this is great, just generally. I think this is great that regulators are leaning into the space. I think, like having the space in the Wild West was not good for anybody. I think having clear rules of engagement, understanding of what goes where, what to say to a consumer, how the data is being collected, the fact that consumers are compensated, the fact that there is an exchange, like all of that stuff. I think it's long overdue, actually. And I'm happy to see kind of the regulation like get in the space. At the end of the day, regulation has a nature of like, from what at least we've seen. I mean, there wasn't GDPR when we launched. GDPR hit in 2018, and it just made a lot of sense. Like we didn't have to second guess anything that we did, because up until then, like we were our own. Like we hold very high moral ethics, and standards, but we didn't know if what we're doing was like good or bad because there was no standards. Like the law didn't or the regulation didn't say anything. So to have like clear guidelines of what you can and cannot do, and have clear directions that basically restrict like not only startup companies but more importantly, kind of like the Facebooks of the world. I think that's although like we'd all have to kind of align ourselves with that regulation, which is probably going to be a pain. I think the pain of adjusting ourselves is going to be temporary, yet the gain for advertisers, agencies, platforms, and most importantly, consumers is going to be a long-term beneficial one.
Awesome. Brian, your thoughts?
So for us, we kind of handle it in a similar manner to Alon said about paying customers. We do it differently. We try to handle privacy as just being really clear, transparent, and offering consumers value, right? So when we give out a sample, consumers engage to unlock that sample. They opt in, they consent, and we give them value. So that's kind of our philosophy at Vengo. We generally try to stay within the guidelines of the most stringent regulations. So whether it's kind of required or not.
Zach?
Yeah, I think the way that we see data privacy is that the intent is really good, but then like the execution from the regulators it doesn't actually trickle down into like properly executing against like what is beneficial totally to the consumer. So I think there'll be regulation, and hopefully it can just adjust. Like it'd be ideal if there can be a feedback loop here and we can have like regulators calibrate, because I think even regulators, if you actually speak to one, so often they are, and I have spoken to a few, they are so lost and confused. They're just like they're voting on things they don't fully understand, and so they almost need their own education system. But I do think overall the privacy is positive for the end user. We just have a lot of opportunity for implementation to not be as damaging for small businesses and large businesses for that matter, but still achieve the exact things that that the data privacy laws want to implement. Like as an example, with CCPA, you have to have like a 1-800 number to call in and a whole host of things like versus just like clicking a button. There's so many things that end users don't even really want to do from their behaviors. So I think that's a part of the miss, but something that we're just going to have to deal with as the ecosystem evolves.
Excellent. Thank you all. So just as a quick reminder, we're open for questions now. We do have one question from the audience. We've been hearing for a while that the cookie is crumbling. A lot of websites have shifted to first-party data as a response. And how has this impacted your space, if at all, in the AdTech world? I guess whoever wants to kick it off, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I will. I'm happy to jump in there. For us, we collect a lot of email address that we're using as a persistent identifier in terms of moving towards things in a cookieless world. And there's a lot of IDs. There's over 200 different IDs now of how people are trying to share to create persistent identity in the AdTech ecosystem, from ID5 and many others. So that's really what we're working towards. I don't think it's a perfect solution yet, but I do think it's the best possible, well, what we've seen so far, one of the better options in terms of having persistent identity currently.
Any other thoughts on that one, or are we good?
Yeah, for us, I would say that, again, we don't have kind of a direct, I would say, link to to kind of an understanding of like what it would do like to advertisers, but like we're actually on the opposite side of that. Like now, kind of advertisers are starting to come to us to ask if we can help them with kind of creating some sort of an identity graph. As I said, we're kind of a measurement data company. We rely on panels of people who we more often than not pay money to. So like there is an ability to create kind of profiles and segments, basically from that opportunity, from that perspective, to kind of complement what's going to happen, after the cookies disappear, as kind of a stand-in instead of the cookie itself. I think that at the end of the day, what's going to happen is, like with this kind of motion, just generally, I think we're going to see a lot of different types of solutions, come up, kind of in light of the cookies like disappearing. But eventually, like there is going to be like consolidation and agreement on the market on like what's the best practice to replace the cookies, and we're probably going to see it's definitely gonna be around for the 2 to 3 years, kind of as an issue. But eventually, like anything else, we'll see some sort of consolidation. And I'm guessing it's going to be through kind of dovetailing into the last topic, around kind of a consented data sharing, privacy compliance type of solution, coming from both advertisers and consumers alike.
Juan, you may have actually answered the part of the next question on behalf of yourself. So what do you think are the biggest changes you see on the horizon with regards to data privacy?
Yeah, I said that a couple of times by now, but again, like, yeah, going back to, I think we're going to see, as I said, like, kind of just formalization and standardization of the space, kind of clear guidelines. To Zach's point, good or like execution is definitely still a question mark, but like at least regulators are going to lean in after they've been absent for like a couple of good years in the meantime. And yeah, mainly kind of coming to a point of maturity that has been missing, and an understanding that data is an industry. It's a practice. It's like a niche and kind of a domain of expertise that needs to be treated as such.
Zach or Brian, any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I do think you're going to see a lot more frameworks popping up and ways for companies to deal. Like there's going to be just a whole industry of that already exists, but growing even more around one-stop solution for all of your compliance needs for GDPR and CCPA and Nevada and New York and 50 other countries, because the amount of work and legal work and taxing to have so many different vendors for compliance is going to be challenging. So I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation there, and just ways to streamline compliance. I do think you're going to see the walled gardens get hit pretty hard. I do think at some point in these next few years, there's going to be, in terms of data privacy and and things that are going to come out, I do think there will be much more sun shining on that front, and that'll lead to a little bit more regulation, as some of the stories, and I know Alon was speaking about as well. So, and I think there'll be a natural evolution. I just think that means more regulation, so tighter controls. That's what's coming down the pipe.
someone asked, has Apple's new privacy ad tracking settings on the iPhone affected any targeting strategies, or could it potentially affect advertisers in the future aside from Facebook?
Yes, it affects all advertisers who are in-app advertising IDFA. Facebook's just the biggest that's impacted. Yeah, there's whole companies that their business models they need to dramatically adjust. There was a whole alliance that was announced a couple of days ago of companies coming up with solutions for this. So I think anybody who works in the in-app space is experiencing that and coming up with workarounds or ways to try to make their technology as effective towards attribution, which is really difficult with what IDFA has put into place.
Excellent. It's been touched on that some areas of advertising really took off this year. Alon specifically mentioned that competition was fierce in the space. As traditional ad spend times get really competitive, is it possible ad spend will shift to fill out other quarters in an attempt to really see return on investment?
Do you guys want to jump in? I'm happy to jump in, but I don't want either of you guys want to jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I think the challenge is that it's almost inertia. I mean, at least the way that I see it is you've got just a lot of also legacy industries that have traditionally planned things in quarterly budgets with ad agencies and agency trading desks, and this kind of trickles down. And it looks at consumer spending patterns. So I do see we're seeing trends, but I don't think it's moved fast enough towards like just, okay, I've budgeted out this much for the quarter. It's getting towards the end of the quarter. Let me dump spend versus let me strategically target more effectively. There's some of that, but there's probably going to be a lot more of that coming.
I would say that kind of what we're seeing, or at least experiencing from kind of the big advertisers that we work with, is not necessarily kind of increasing spend, although like it is and has happened like in like social and digital, but rather diversity of platforms. So like they're trying to experiment with, like, I mean, just from the questions that we get from the kind of the Fortune 500 companies that we work with, right? So do you guys cover Reddit? Do you cover Pinterest? Do you cover Twitch and Discord and TikTok? Obviously, I mean, there are more and more platforms and channels that are going to be in the mix. And by the way, also kind of, I personally think that are here to stay. Unlike, kind of some things that we saw kind of popping up, um, uh, kind of not in a consistent way. So I do think that ad spend is maybe more kind of dispersed across the different platforms. I'm not sure that it's necessarily, like going to be like significantly upped in any given quarter point in time.
Right. Excellent. So just again, thank you to all of our panelists. As a reminder to our attendees, we're going to drop a poll in a few seconds. If there's anyone you'd like to reach out to them, please, just fill in this poll with your information and we can reach out. And thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.